My name is Judy Gilmore, and I'm the director at Opalka Gallery. And tonight, I really welcome you to our virtual opening for Unraveling, a show featuring work by Yura Adams, Joan Grubin, Ruby Palmer, and Christina Tenaglia. An opening is such an important part of an art show because it really allows us to come together as a community and to celebrate the work of the artist as well as the work it takes to put up such an ambitious show. So I'm really glad that we can gather even virtually. So I hope you brought your own wine and cheese as we have a wonderful conversation tonight with our curator, Yura Adams. But of course, all of our artists are joining us from their studios as well, and we'll talk a little bit about their pieces in the show. So tonight is just a tease. It's really just a sneak peek of the exhibition, and it's a wonderful exhibition. So I do hope that everyone will come visit us in person. We are open for in-person visits. Our hours are Tuesdays through Saturdays, 12 to 5 p.m. And on Thursdays, we're open 12 to 8 p.m. You can visit the gallery safely. We have several protocols in place. Masks are, of course, required. We are requiring that people fill out a health questionnaire when they enter the gallery and have their temperatures taken, and of course, stay socially distanced while they're in their gallery with anyone who's not in their household. And of course, we are asking people to come in small groups. No more than 25 people can be in the gallery at any time. And most of the time, we have much fewer than that. So it is really a safe place to visit right now. In our last show, we had over 300 visitors. So we really do encourage everyone to come out to see the work in person, because tonight is no substitute for seeing these wonderful large-scale installations that are in our space right now. I also want to encourage you to join us for other exhibition-related events that are all happening virtually, including artist lectures by both Yura Adams. She's going to be speaking on Thursday, the 12th of November, and Christina Tenaglia, who's giving a lecture on Thursday, December 3rd. So please join us for those two events to go even further in depth to these two artists and what they've been doing throughout their careers and leading up to the work that's in tonight's show. And of course, we want you to stay on for a deeper dive conversation tonight at 7. After we do a quick tour of the show, Nicole Hayes, who's curator at Art Omi, a wonderful institution just 40 miles south of us in Ghent, New York, Nicole is going to lead a conversation with our artists about their work and about their roles as women artists. And this is a program that's in partnership with the Russell Sage College's Women's Institute. And it's going to be a really nice way to have, again, a deeper conversation with these artists about their work. So please stay on after the tour tonight at 7 for that conversation. I also want to make sure that I thank both Amy Griffin and Natasha Holmes, who are my wonderful colleagues here at Opalka Gallery. We have a small staff and we do a lot to mount these wonderful and ambitious shows. So thank you to both Amy and Natasha, as well as to all of our Sage Work Studies students who literally do the heavy lifting in our shows. So thank you to all of them for making this possible. I want to also thank the college's Board of Trustees, several of who are joining tonight. And I want to, of course, thank Chet and Karen Opalka. Their support allows us to continue mounting ambitious programs and events, wonderful exhibitions, and allows us to keep our doors open. I also want to thank the Russell Sage College and, of course, President Christopher Ames for allowing us to be open right now. We are one of the only academic institutions, academic galleries that is open in our region. And it really is because the president trusts both us and our audiences to do so safely. And we are so excited that we get to continue our programming during such uncertain times and to provide opportunities for artists to show in our space, as well as for visitors to come and see art at a time when an escape in an art gallery is just really such a wonderful thing to do. So thank you to the college for allowing us to continue our work during such a strange time. I want to introduce Yura Adams. Yura Adams is the curator of our show, Unraveling, and Yura Adams has been such a wonderful partner in us in mounting this exhibition. Yura's idea for Unraveling came to us in a very odd way, but what an odd time 2020 has been. As we were really trying to figure out with the rest of the world what we were going to do in the fall, we sat around this spring and we had so many unknowns, as everyone did. And we had all these holes in our schedules. We had a traveling show that got moved around, and we just had no idea how we were going to mount a show that to the quality that we really wanted in such a short amount of time. Yura's proposal for Unraveling kind of fell in our laps, and we were thrilled. It featured artists that we'd been really wanting to work with, artists whose careers curators we had followed. And it was artists who all were really interested in using our space and the unique aspects of our physical space, the lofty ceilings, the very large walls, to maximize potential and to really showcase their work in ways that they had never done before. So each of these artists has done something larger than I think they've done in their entire careers, using our large walls and our high ceilings. And we're so excited to provide that opportunity with them. It was also just wonderful to be in the space installing with them. It was a wonderful team, a great collaboration among all the artists and Yura. And I'm so excited to introduce Yura, and she will explain to you her idea for Unraveling and how it came about and a little bit about the show's theme. So take it away, Yura.
Hi, thank you so much, Judy, for that really beautiful introduction and making it so clear how the show landed in this particular space. About a year ago, I was thinking about a show, and at that time, I was acting director of a small teaching gallery at Columbia Green Community College. It's since closed because of the pandemic, but we had a show down there of Christina Tenaglia with myself earlier in the fall with other faculty, and then later in the fall, Joan Grubin and Ruby Palmer had a show in that space. It's called the Foundation Gallery. And those experiences were so positive to me, and the experience of getting to know these artists was so strong that I started to think about, well, maybe I could ask them if I could put together a show. The title, when you first encounter Unraveling, at least for me, the most obvious idea was that, well, it means things are slowly falling apart. And indeed, even a year ago, before the pandemic, it seemed as though society was going through some kind of implosion. And that really was the initial idea, was this thought that everyone is going through the same thing. And perhaps if I put together artists, it could reflect that idea. But as I got together with the artists and as the show started forming, another definition of unraveling really emerged and in my mind took precedence in this show. And that is the idea of unraveling perhaps a story, say a detective story, where one clue leads to another. And I came to realize that one of the things that unites us as artists is that we do work in somewhat of a similar fashion. You'll see when you come in to see the show that there's completely different approaches, but one of the things that does unite it, there's a number of things, but this thing that ties it to the title Unraveling is that it really is this idea of working through materials and finding one discovery that leads to the next and the next and the next, ultimately coming to the end of the work that way. All four of us have other similarities. I feel as though there's really a strong sense of design and form in all of our work. In a funny way, the palette is somewhat similar. I can't even put my finger on it. I was walking around the gallery the other day when the show was up trying to figure out what that was, but there is a feeling of lightness and strength of form. So from a formal point of view, that really connects the four of us. So I kind of very shyly asked Christina one day when she was picking her work up from the faculty show if she might be interested in being in a show with me. I had no idea where we were going to land. And she said, yeah, sure, in her strong way. And then I sent out emails to Joan and to Ruby and got resounding yeses. And at that point, I started sending out proposals, having no idea where I was going to land. But right before the pandemic hit, I went to the very last day of Joanne Carson's show at Opalka and met Judy there briefly and was really struck again. I had been to the gallery many times, but I was struck by the strength of that show and the vision that it showed in the organization of the show itself. So I thought to myself, well, I'll send it to Opalka. I'll see what happens. You never know. And through the serendipity that Judy described earlier on, they came back with a yes, and I about fell over. And from that point, we started working on the show. And the work, seeing the work evolve over this period of, I guess it's been 7 months, has been very interesting. We did early studio visits in June, And then I did some personal studio visits in July and August as I could. And we had a lot of discussion as we went through it. And it became clearer and clearer that there were going to be a lot of different expressions of unraveling, but there was going to be a lot of strength in this face of diversity that we all are facing right now as humans. So we all have this kind of unity in our society. And as artists, we're also facing what we have to face, this feeling of having to be flexible and kind of ride out what's happening, but also be creative, kind of facing that in the diversity that we're looking at. So that's really the concept. At this point, I'd like to turn it back over to Judy. I don't want to go on too long. There is a curator's statement at the front of the gallery when you come in, and I really want to end with this. I want to thank Sage College and Opalka Gallery and Judy and Amy Griffin and all the people that helped us during this installation from the bottom of my heart. If Judy and Amy Griffin hadn't been so open to receiving my idea, we wouldn't have done this show at all. And that's really a very powerful thing. And if Opalka and Sage hadn't been so open to having Judy Gilmore and Amy Griffin in their gallery, it wouldn't have happened either. So I really thank everybody. Back to you, Judy.
Thank you, Yura. Thank you, Yura.
Yeah.
It has really been a wonderful collaboration. Now we're just going to let each of the artists give a little tease about their work as we showcase the tour of the show. And we're going to start with Joan Grubin. Joan?
Yeah, technology is not my forte. Okay. Can you hear me?
We can hear you.
Okay, great. I just want to start with a huge thank you to you, Yura, for bringing these four women together. And it's been a great ride making this show happen. And also Judy and Amy, you're just, really wonderful to work with. So anyway, there's my piece. I can't really talk about it except in the context of the current crisis in the country. I mean, I started making this almost immediately after the pandemic hit, and we fled New York and came to a place in the Hudson River Valley that we've had for 35 years. And I had no plan of what I was going to make. And Yura's proposal was in the wind, but she was sending it around and I wasn't really thinking about it. And I really started, but just by making these bundles I had scraps of paper. My studio was a mess from things I've been making in the fall, and was suddenly back up here again in the mess. And I started just bundling the scraps together. And if the camera pans down, it will eventually, there's a big ball of scraps of paper on the floor, just packing this together. And that was a way to start. And then I started weaving, different colored sections of paper together, and had no idea where this was going, but I did want to build on something I had done at the other show at Columbia Green that Yura mentioned, where I'd found a way to bring found objects into my paper work. And so then all of a sudden, the Yura's proposal found a home at Opalka, and that was thrilling because I had the great good fortune to show there the summer before. So I knew the space and I knew Judy. The space is glorious, and it allowed this whatever I was making, I could see it could really spread its wings and be very large and substantial. So I do have a connection to this process of weaving paper, and I find there's something in the act of weaving that I think of the word repair, like it feels like bringing elements together, making them work together, and repairing something. And in this time when the world was just really, so many crazy things were happening, and everything was upside down, and the future was and still is so uncertain. There was something very comforting about doing the weaving, and another idea in this piece and in general that I'm very drawn to is the idea of making something out of nothing. So this piece is made out of cast off scraps of paper from earlier paper projects. There's almost nothing in here that I purchased or new materials, or so really made with what I had at hand. And that seems to be a kind of pandemic theme where life has slowed down for a lot of people and options are limited, and you're stuck somewhere and you just use what you have. And so let me just see if I have anything else that I want to add to this. No, I just think, this piece really felt almost like it made itself. It just evolved so slowly over time, and really 6 months. And I feel in general, I'm kind of learning to listen to the work itself a little better, like trying to hear what it wants to say and where it wants to go. So there's a really an organic feeling to it. And I guess I'll just end by saying that I'd like to give a shout out to the idea of pleasure, because I think sometimes pleasure is forgotten in talking about art, and just the sheer pleasure of looking, and also fun, because I feel there is a kind of buoyant spirit in this piece, and I think there's fun to be had. So fun isn't a very elevated artistic concept, but I'm in favor of it.
Thank you, Joan. I think if the piece could speak, it would say, come see me in person, because it is absolutely a piece that cannot be appreciated unless you're standing in front of it. And it really is just quite, it has a gravitas that is just quite amazing with such kind of crude materials. And it is a lot of fun. So thank you, Joan, for sharing. And I really do encourage people to come see it. Next up is Christina Tenaglia, whose work is right next to Joan's, and you'll get a view of it kind of as the large kind of installation, and we'll zoom in on some of the smaller components. So Christina, tell us a little bit about this piece.
I want to add to Joan's list humor.
Yes.
Because I think humor can keep you looking, as can pleasure. And that is definitely something that I'm interested in. I had an unusual pandemic situation. I was, unlike most artists who were not a lot of artists were separated from their studios for a while, but I was away from my studio for the vast majority of the pandemic up until really I started installing this piece. So I was occasionally able to come home where my studio is and prep parts and then kind of bring them with me. And it was really this process of limited access and being away from my studio and having to work with what I had. Similar to Joan, but in a slightly different way, I work all with scrap material. I buy scraps, literally. And so there's something about working with something as it came, but also a complete lack of preciousness of what I'm working with, that I find is a real important part of my process. There are clay pieces that I build, obviously, so those are a little bit different. But I'm really interested individually in kind of trying to bring things that are normally on the periphery that we don't notice more into the center and into focus. And so these pieces are very focused in and of themselves, but they're hard to place. And so it's a tension that I am very interested in capturing, and is sometimes very elusive, and sometimes is captured better than others. But I want them to seem familiar, but to the point where your inability to place them is slightly uncomfortable. And I love being next to Joan, partially because her piece becomes this huge weave that's all interconnected. And when and Judy, I don't know if it's possible to get to a point where it's a little bit more of a wide shot, but I really see the installation aspect of the work that I do to be kind of woven together. So it's all of these individual parts, but I consider the wall itself and the structure to connect everything in a way that really draws attention often to the surface and to the particular location, and to things like the expansion joint and the gap and the height of the wall. And I think even in this video, the piece that's hung at the top is almost unseen. But it's really, I've kind of been looking at photos of the installation during the week when I come home, looking at it and been disappointed with the photos, because it really is the expanse, the ability to be able to see expanse and detail at the same time only happens in person. It's almost impossible to capture via photograph or video. And so this installation for me really happened on site. I had some notations and some ideas of what I would do. And then this is the first, the installation where I have the most incorporated these wall drawings in with the three-dimensional works, really playing with the idea of what is there and what is not there, what is shadow, what is representation, what is object. Is something representational, or does it stand on its own as these kind of ideas of things? And I guess it's interesting that Joan mentioned found objects. I have always tried to incorporate found objects into my work and have been incredibly unsuccessful with it. I feel like this wealthy found object, and I built onto that in this particular installation. So it seems like I work with what I find on site more than being able to successfully bring objects into the work. So I'm one of the reasons I think found objects don't work well for me is I'm very interested in how we take in and process information, and how when we're given partial information, we complete it. Because we're uncomfortable not being able to come to a clear answer. So we fill in the blanks. And so that's really kind of what the work is about. How do we as viewers fill in the information that's missing? So, and I think I'll leave it there.
Thank you, Christina. It really is quite a thrilling experience to see her installation and how she's responded to the site. Again, it's a must-see in person, so I really do encourage everyone to see it. And watching Christina work was quite amazing, because she, again, in real time, was really making changes and responding to the space, and it's just lovely and wonderful what she's done. So thank you, Christina. Next up is Ruby Adams, who again has done some really thrilling work. I'm sorry, Ruby Palmer, excuse me. Ruby, sorry about that. Ruby, why don't you go ahead and explain your work in the show?
Okay. Well, I want to first say thank you so much to Yura as well for including me in the show. This has been such a thrill, and hearing the other artists speak, it's just, sometimes I feel like they're just like pulling the words right out of my mouth. So that's really great. So I guess, yeah, I'm showing quite a variety of work. Some of it had begun during the pandemic, and then some of it was way before. This first piece called Dreams of Deep Storage is a construction made out of painted basswood and scrap wood. And a lot of my work is actually based on dreams, although I don't, directly reference them as far as visually. I kind of take them into their own imaginative world. So I was having some fun with that one, including the little references of the mini constructions. And then I'm also exhibiting a number of models of architectural spaces that I have in my studio. This one is called House Plans. I don't think the video goes around it, but it's actually just a facade. That the piece standing up is just a sort of a thin wood veneer. And then there's kind of a part around the bottom that wraps around. And I'm also including models in this dollhouse, which is right here. I have kids, they're now teenagers, but this was their dollhouse when they were little. I have twins, so I had bought this kind of large size dollhouse so that they could both be in it at the same time. And this is, I spray painted it white and started playing around in the studio with work that I hadn't really thought of as a model, but once I put it in the dollhouse, the scale was so incredibly satisfying that I started really having fun with this piece, putting all different kinds of pieces in it and seeing, you know, what kind of things I would want to explore should I make a big piece. And they are mainly mixed media. They have a lot of painted wood, and these are two more models that we put on shelves for this show, but they are also ideas for larger constructions. So when the pandemic hit, I had this idea of, I think I had started, oh, this is another of my wall pieces. Sorry, I was starting to talk about the big piece already. This is called Searching for Pools, and that's all painted wood, and it's 3-dimensional off the wall. But when the pandemic hit, I had kind of started playing around with making a much larger form. And this is what ended up happening. This is called Contraption. It was made all, again, for like these other artists, from scraps. It's cardboard, it's wood scraps, it's pieces of drop cloth, pieces of canvas, clementine boxes, house paint left over from house projects, silver electrician's tape, 2x4s, all that kind of stuff. So this was so kind of fun and incredible for me to finally be working quite large scale, and, you know, working from the models, but getting obviously a lot more detailed. And this piece really took a life of its own on. What has been really interesting about putting this piece in Opalka is that my studio has 8-foot ceilings, and Opalka has like whatever 30-foot ceilings. And I realized this piece is actually not at 100%. I thought the scale was 100%, but once I got it here, I thought, oh, you know, it's actually more like 80%. So what's been really interesting is putting it on the platform. I've really felt that it still relates to the imaginary space of the models, so that you're really still, you're having an experience with it that is still quite investigating scale and imagination rather than physicality. You're not climbing through the piece. Those black boxes are all hollow. You can't really tell it in this picture. But they all kind of, well, actually some of them are false doors, and then some of them go inset a little bit. And I love seeing Christina's work through these windows. That's really cool. And then there's one more piece that's a small construction behind this one. I think it's on the video, but little red piece. And I love it next to that fire alarm.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah,
thank you, Ruby.
It. Sure.
And that's Ruby Palmer, everyone. I'm sorry, I got you.
I like my new name.
Ruby Palmer. Next up is Yura Adams. She's the Adams of the group. And Yura, why don't you tell us about your work in the show?
Okay, what we're looking at here is a series of 6 paintings, 3x3. They're, as you can see, they're quite large. It was quite an adventure installing these, going up and down the lift. I consider these 6 paintings one work called Geologic Time. about the same time I was forming the idea for this show, at that point I had been thinking more and more for the year before that about global warming. I mean, I'm not alone in any of this stuff, but it was starting to enter my thought process when I went into the studio. And so I realized that as an artist, I really couldn't make a statement that would do anything, but I wanted to make something about my feelings about it. So I thought, well, what isn't going to change? Well, what's underneath my feet isn't necessarily going to change with global warming. So I started studying about geology, and these paintings are all about that. I know you can't tell. It doesn't come out and scream, this is a sedimentary rock, or this one was formed by compression, but the thought process is there, this kind of idea that the earth is constantly forming underneath our feet, and there's a lot of movement there. But at the same time, I wanted to somehow express this feeling of things being really kind of vulnerable. And so I painted these paintings on Tyvek, and I used very transparent paints and large knives and brushes and very thin paint. And the way that they're hung, they're just kind of barely attached with magnets, so they kind of float there. And that's what I was after, is this feeling of really the moment, and that things could disappear, even though these are about the earth. What's above the earth can disappear with all of our activity. And the work to the right of that is an installation piece. There's actually painting on the wall. And I feel as though it's a form that escaped from one of these paintings. It's called Release of Gravity. And the drawing element that became really important to me in the painting of geologic time really took hold in this little installation piece. And the palette and the materials I use all feel very transparent to me. So that's that wall. I know we have to keep moving. I think the next part would take me up to the front of the gallery, Judy. Or we're gonna have a little zoom here on geologic time. So I'm combining paint with a printmaking technique that I developed. And I've been using that technology a lot in my work, and we're going to see more evidence of that up here. I have this old 2200 printer that I nurse, and a big background in photography. Photography has always been with me, has never left me. It's my sketchbook, and I use photographic image both as inspirations. A lot of my work is about the surprising forms and ideas I encounter in nature. And through that investigation, this kind of poetic commentary emerges. So here we're looking at a piece that's called questo. It's slang for question. What's your questo? But I feel as though the forms really are forming question marks, kind of a yin-yang idea. The pieces are on canvas. They're held up there with magnets and tacks. And here we're gonna, I just wanted to mention that writing underneath there is not meant to be read. It's considered a drawing, but it's also indicating that it's a warning and a poem. So there is some poetic commentary. The tower on the left, it is called tower, refers to kind of an archaeological ruin that one might encounter in the future. Again, there's that faux writing, drawing, printmaking, painting combination. And it stands there 8 feet tall. All of my work for this show got larger than life. And it was inspired by the space of Opalka that was available. And they don't look that big once they get into the space. It's amazing. Maybe geologic time in the back going up 15 feet, but 8 feet is nothing in this space. So that's my story. And I know that we've got more stuff we've got to do. So I'll go back to you, Judy.
Thank you, Yura. And again, I do encourage everyone to see the show in person. It's quite a different experience than seeing it on video, and it's all really, really wonderful work. So thank you everyone for joining us for just a sneak peek of the exhibition, which opened today. Again, our hours are Tuesday through Saturdays, 12 p.m., Thursdays, 8 p.m. And please join us for our next conversation, which we're gonna roll right into. I also want to mention, if you could please mute your microphones, everyone, that would be really great and would allow us to not hear what's going on and to hear who's speaking. And then also, as we move into our next conversation, if you have questions, please feel free to put them into the chat box, and both myself and Amy will be checking questions and answers. We are also going to reserve time at the end of the next conversation to answer questions and to make sure that your questions do get posed to the artist. So please use the chat function, and you can chat everyone, or you can chat myself or Amy Griffin, and we'll make sure that your questions are addressed. So thank you to all of the artists for this sneak peek and tour of the show. And thank you to everyone for joining us for tonight's virtual opening. I wish we could do it in person, but this will have to do. So this concludes our curator's tour of Unraveling, but we're going to move right into our conversation. Our conversation with our artists started because Russell Sage College has been a women's college on its Troy campus for 100 years. And just this fall in 2020, Russell Sage College has gone co-ed. And in order to honor the college's historic origins as a women's college, this year the college has founded the Women's Institute at Russell Sage College. The Women's Institute was created to respond to the contemporary and evolving cultural landscape of the 21st century while honoring Russell Sage College's century-long dedication to women's empowerment. All of the departments at Sage were really encouraged to find programs that could collaborate with the Women's Institute. And we thought it was a wonderful opportunity as we showcased an exhibition with 4 career women artists to really talk about what it's like to be a woman in the contemporary art world today. We really didn't have much of an agenda beyond that. And these are really interesting artists who don't necessarily address their identity in their work, nor do they think of themselves as women artists or as artists who are women. They simply think of themselves as contemporary artists. So why is it interesting to talk to them about their role as women artists? And that is a conversation that we were very excited to have, led by Nicole Hayes. Nicole was eager to take on this challenge in addressing this context of our college, as well as the exhibition and its artists. And so I'm going to introduce Nicole, and she's going to lead us through a conversation with these artists who are going to describe their careers, their work, answer some of Nicole's questions, and of course, address your questions as well. So Nicole, welcome. I want to read your bio to everyone, and we are so excited to have Nicole. And again, I encourage everyone to visit Art Omi, which is just 40 miles south of here in Ghent, New York. Nicole Hayes is curator there, and Art Omi is a sculpture park in Ghent, New York. And since joining Art Omi in 2014, Nicole has curated the annual summer exhibition in the sculpture park, installing up to 10 new works in the park each year. That's amazing, Nicole, because we know these are large-scale installations and they're not easy. She also curates exhibitions in the Art Omi Newmark Gallery. She's been a visiting critic at Wasaic Project, Smack Melon, and Residency Unlimited, among others. And before coming to Art Omi, Nicole was the studio manager to the renowned painter Sean Scully. Working closely with Scully for over a decade, Nicole oversaw the daily operations of his studios in New York, London, Barcelona, and Munich, and managed commissioned projects including large-scale public sculpture and orchestrated international traveling exhibitions. Nicole has worked in numerous galleries in New York City, including Exit Art and ABC Contemporary, where she curated her first exhibition. Nicole holds a BFA in ceramics from RISD, and she continues to create studio pottery. So please join me in a warm welcome for Nicole, a warm virtual welcome for Nicole Hayes.
Hello. Thank you for that. Such a nice introduction, Judy, and thank you for inviting me. I've really admired the work of all the women in this show for quite some time and have been following what they have been doing. So it really felt really exciting to get to have a conversation with all of you. Some of you I've met before, and some of you I've visited Ruby's studio, but I was very excited to kind of dive in a little deeper. And I was really pleased to be invited by specifically the Women's Institute and to discuss those issues. I mean, one thing that kind of first immediately came to me was being excited, but also at this time when many of us are really exploring like what it means to be whoever we perceive ourselves to be, however we project ourselves to be in society. And I think a lot of people in this unrest that we're in the US right now are questioning and challenging who we are and what our roles are in society and where our privilege may lie, and questioning things about equity. I know that's been a big conversation for us actually at Art Omi recently. So, I really started to wonder, like, as these women are saying that they are artists first and foremost. And, sometimes I think we look and we go, oh my gosh, are we still having this conversation, right? Are we still questioning like what it is to be a woman artist in 2020? So I guess one thing I want to do is kind of turn that over to the artists in the show and ask, how they perceive themselves. And I hope that works with muting and unmuting. And Yura, maybe we can start with you, since you brought us into this journey, how you perceive yourself as a female artist in 2020 and how relevant you think that is.
Oh, thank you. So nice to see you here, and thank you for moderating this. Well, I was talking to some of the other artists, and we kind of all agreed that none of us really thought about being a woman artist. But on the other hand, here we are in 2020, and there's so many more women artists right now, and so many more women in positions of helping other women. So in that way, it's really, really changed. I had to think back about when I started out as an artist a long time ago at the San Francisco Art Institute, and I was thinking, well, there was only one or maybe two other teachers that I remember that were there that were women, and I wasn't inspired by them. In fact, most of the artists I looked at were men at that time, and that has totally changed. So as a woman artist today, I think I'm swimming in a different fish tank, that there's a lot more going on. There's a great deal of freedom that we are experiencing that's really the result of pioneers, and not only in the field of art, but in the field of politics and every other field. Women who stuck their necks out and didn't think about the limitations of being a woman, just went ahead and did it, and didn't think that being a woman could ever stop them. And I think that being an artist, you kind of have to do that anyway. You just, if you're gonna make any headway, even in your own work, you just gotta do it and not worry about whether you're gonna be held back by any disadvantage.
Thank you, Yura. I really appreciate that. And I was thinking of something you said in a brief email exchange we had today about, essentially also that like you can never really be too comfortable in that, like women's issues are still under attack, like right here, this very day in America. So, there's sort of no time to be vigilant. But I also, what you're saying, about like the experience of like female faculty in art schools and things like that. And when this show was so much about installation, and just a few days before Judy had asked me, I had visited Judy Pfaff in her studio. And I remember Judy was always so important to me as a young artist and somebody interested in art history at a young age, because in Gardner's art history, she was in the book. And there was like, just like a few people and a few women in the book. And like Elizabeth Murray was in the book and Judy was in the book. And, I remember going to see shows of hers in the city, and just when she would pop up, I would just always be like, you have to go because she was in the book. And so it just kind of placed her in this position of importance. And she is, so important to installation art. And she's, the mother, I feel like, of that work. Joan, what was your sort of feedback in yourself? You were a little more hesitant on the topic, and just wondering, how you perceive yourself and your gender as an artist, but also maybe some of the artists that are women that you've looked up to and admired in your career.
Yeah, I guess it's I certainly self-identify as a woman, and but as an artist, I don't. So you know, I'm well aware of the statistics out there, and you know, how women are still so far behind in terms of representation, and you know, all that is wrong. But it's out of my control, and I so I feel like I kind of um, I sort of choose to focus on other things and on the work itself, and not so much, you know, gender relations. So I, you know, I think you know, in working with paper, I think there might be some connection, unconscious, because, you know, wherever you go, there you are, and you can't help but express who you are, even if it's not, you know, overt or ideological. So there's something about the vulnerability of paper, I think, that it's and also the weaving, I think, you know, can be thought of, you know, weaving is a very ancient craft, and just the physical, the simple physical gesture of weaving threads, or weaving threads of paper, or strands of paper. I have felt a sense of I don't know, just kind of identification with people. Maybe I don't think of it so much as women, because I think men, you know, weave fishnets and have been weavers of cloth and all that too. But it's more a connection to people back through time, and it's funny, over, you know, in a process of starting to work with paper, which is now goes back about 20 years, and really committing to that, it just draws me, because it's so available, and it's so friendly, and you know, I'm never exactly sure of the you know, the sort of long range archival durability of what I make. And I struggled with that for a while. Is it really okay to make something that you're not sure it's going to last? And I made my peace with that. It took a few years, but there, you know, and I certainly have good male friends, artist friends, but men often would come, if they come into the studio and see what I do, I can see that the paper often makes them a little anxious. And I can't tell you how many times people have said to me, well, have you ever thought about making this in metal? And I just have to laugh, because it just seems like, you know, they just wanted to be this tougher, more durable material. But while it's not a super conscious concern of mine, I have to say that there are so many women artist friends that I have, and I find that the kind of bonds that are there, where I feel there's so much mutual support and kind of sharing of opportunities, and you know, coming into each other's studios and helping with the work, you know, offering suggestions, and just having that great kind of shop talk, which I love more than anything. In that sense, I'm extremely grateful to the women artists that I know and look to and have learned from.
Well, I thought one thing, you know, you were discussing like being aware of the statistics, and like it made me immediately sort of think of, you know, how we can choose to like use the art market as a way to decide the worth in people's work. Or, you know, we can ignore that. And I imagine many women in this group or people have seen the Hilma af Klint, the recent documentary, which is, you know, really insightful. And one of the things that I really kind of took away from that was this idea that because her work can never be sold on the market, that she will only have this certain position in the art world because there'll never be like a specific auction value placed on her work, which is one of the sort of theories behind the documentary, because her work was just given to the Swedish government. So I thought that was like, you know, an interesting thing. And also then when you immediately started talking about working with paper, and I was thinking of all those sort of large paintings on paper that she did that were later put on canvas, and just sort of that preciousness. And even sort of listening to my own biography, because I did work for like, you know, this sort of very masculine painter for like a decade of my life. And this idea of constantly making work that would sort of last for forever because of, you know, in a market driven way was something. I mean, also thinking about what you were talking about in terms of weaving, you know, I agree, like that weaving, we tend to think of it as being sort of small and precious and having this ancient, you know, reference, and is something that women have done for so long. And yet it certainly, of course, goes, you know, throughout history. And thinking of somebody maybe like Janet Eckelman, who's actually taken weaving to this like massive scale, which is kind of interesting. So I want to try to involve everybody, which is because I would love to just go deep into your piece, and I'm trying to hold back and keep everybody in the conversation on this particular topic. So Ruby, maybe you could chime in on some of this and how, you know, you feel like I always see your pieces as having, you know, these sort of domestic spaces to them, and you know, maybe that sort of role of that sort of domestic space and care, and how that relates to gender.
And well, yeah, I mean, I was thinking about the issue, or well, I don't know what is the issue, the topic, and just thinking, it's the thing that I think about all the time, and it's the thing that I don't think about. So, but yes, I mean, my studio is in a barn in the back of our house, and I'm very, very much linked to our house as well as, you know, the studio. So it's almost like a live workspace, although I do go outside between the two buildings. And, you know, I have a lot, I mean, as I said in my little talk, I do dream a lot about houses and the insides of houses, and sort of a lot of times kind of having to get up through a house, and there's usually little compartments that I have to kind of get into, and sometimes I'm being pursued by someone else, and I don't know, but they're haunting, these dreams. The other dream that I often have, and I had one the other night about the studio, is that I had discovered this whole other space that is part of my house, part of my apartment. This dream started in New York, and now I have it a little bit more about discovering that I have a gigantic studio somewhere that is accessible, and I haven't really known about it, and I haven't paid my rent in 4 years. So there's definitely this preoccupation with space and what feels safe and not safe. And I think with contraption, which is the large construction that I built, that's not this one that we're looking at right now, but you know, that this idea of the house is a space that both protects you and constricts you and confines you. And during quarantine, I think we were all really wrapped up in that. Like, wow, we're so lucky to have our houses, especially up here in the Hudson Valley. The rates are pretty low. We have houses, we have yards. At the same time, we were all kind of going crazy and claustrophobic. And so that interesting domestic, you know, duality that we are all living. And as I'm a mother, and, you know, I am responsible for a lot of the parenting and the domestic stuff. So there's a lot of that in my life, and balancing my work and my studio practice with my home life, yeah, which is equally, if not more important, my home life. I mean, yeah.
Well, it's really interesting to hear about your dream sequences there, because one thing I kept thinking of, and even just seeing, you know, this brief presentation, and I saw the show yesterday, but just is like that wild sense of scale that's happening between all of your pieces in the show. And like, there's these kind of moments where it almost looks like we're doing like a flyover, right, of a landscape for a moment, and then kind of, you know, going into this sort of a tiny scale, and you're kind of zooming around through there. And that I like the way even with this sculptural work, like you're almost making like a tablescape, or how
Yes.
how all of your work kind of have this like installation feeling. Like I'm fond of those above the doorway pieces.
Oh yeah.
But that how you know, and just really like playing with that idea of like a door jamb and things like that, and how that continues.
I love art in unexpected places, which is why I love Christina's installation so much. And have experimented with that myself, you know, just putting them up high and, you know, just all kind of around the room. And I really relate to that a lot.
Yeah.
And I think when you're in your house, you know, you kind of, I don't know, you're hanging out on the couch, you're looking up at the window, and what if there's a piece of art up there on top of the window, you know?
Right. And what about like the idea of, you know, stage sets? Because I pieces really came across like,
totally.
Like, especially like, I think like those little Noguchi stage sets.
Yes, I love those. I had a great aunt who passed away a few years ago, but she used to take me on occasion. She went to the Metropolitan Opera and she had a seatmate, and once in a while her seatmate would be sick and I would get to go. And I was in grad school at the time, and my mind was blown. I almost dropped out of grad school and like went to set design school because I just felt like it was just unbelievable. And those stages are really narrow and they fit in so much space in there. And I thought the relationship between the stage and painting space and installation space, but you know, distortion is really fascinating to me. And I think that's what I love about painting. I love, you know, and just where your mind is going.
Yeah.
Well, there's an earlier version of my piece. I took a lot of that out, but that's nice to see it. There's some additions and some subtractions to that.
I love that restraint that you had of like only having that one sort of maybe piece of furniture, little like sculpture,
the little lamp
in the window there, and you know, that 80% scale was repeated to me, which always sort of makes me think of like Disney World and how everything apparently at Disney World is like 2/3 scale.
Yes.
And
it is. I didn't realize that. Wow,
yeah, I've heard that on like a podcast somewhere.
Yeah.
But how that sort of puts people at ease. And I think like your playfulness, which is also getting back to that earlier like discussion of humor and stuff, and how, you know, diminutive things, like how they tend to like put us at ease. And
they put us at ease and they bring out, I think, a playfulness. And I mean, there's nothing that I love more than a kid who just sets up a whole thing on the floor of the dominoes and the trucks and the dolls and the stuffed animals and the, you know, all of that. That's just magic to me.
Yeah. I think that's really interesting. And then I've also thought a lot about during like the pandemic and the various like coping, when we were in heavy quarantine, the various like coping strategies we had, and how like I would see my daughter play and think like, oh, like what a great escape that is to have, to be able to, which is really something that I think all artists have, right? Of like being able to like, you know, be living in this world that we currently live in, whatever it is, and to be able to like, you know, go into another world.
Yes.
And how much
believe me, I did a lot of that. I have been doing a lot of that, going out to the studio again.
Yeah. And do you ever think of that kind of like performance, like in your mind? Are you still sort of like, you know, I think of sometimes when you're setting up the dollhouse and you're thinking about the scene that will happen in there, is that same sort of narrative dialogue happening for you?
I mean, it happens. It's funny, you know, I don't know, you may have seen the Instagram post. I have these little plastic animals. So once in a while a goat, you know, appears, or a chick. I guess I have a chicken, I have a goat, I have a couple deer. I mean, I just thought it was so funny thinking about animals looking at modern art. I just that's the humor of the whole. But that's like the joke that I have to myself in the studio, and then other people think it's kind of goofy. But I don't know. I think it's funny. So I do. I mean, but I don't really spend a lot of time. I think more about like, how would I make this big? Do I want to make it big? How would you walk through it? you know, what scale would it be, that kind of stuff. Yeah.
That's so
but I really am interested in the imagination, which is why when I was giving my talk, I was saying how having that piece, the big piece up on the pedestal, that really brought it together for me. Because I was like, you're still in an imaginative space. You're not real life. It's not down on the ground, and you're not, you know, it's still up.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
That makes sense. And I also just find it so interesting that like you went big, but it's still
small.
Like, you know, or just sort of talks about being miniature, even though, you know, it's like pretty big.
And the last thing I added to it were these teeny tiny legs that if you see the show, you'll see them. They're like half an inch, and they're propping one little flap up, and that was like the last bit. Yeah.
Really sweet. I feel like this is a good maybe segue to Christina.
Yeah.
You really have like a cast of characters, and after like seeing your installation yesterday, I mean, that was like the one sort, you know, I kept just sort of thinking about all of like these different little guys or something, and like these, you know, different little friends. And do you have that kind of playful relationship when you work in your studio, and do things have their own identities there that differ in the gallery world?
I mean, they definitely do. They definitely kind of take on roles, I guess you could say. They are animated. I love the discussion about scale that you just had with Ruby. I am so interested in things where you can't quite figure out the scale, whether it's a model or whether it's the scale it's supposed to be. And I think about that constantly. You know, whether I'm making something that is a smaller representation of something larger, or whether I'm blowing up something that's microscopic into something huge. And so I think that plays into it a little bit. It's odd to me that these things, I think a lot about the way that something can be a figure, an object, and a structure at the same time. And so that is at play a lot in my work. How can something embody, you know, something figural, something that is inanimate as an object, and something that relates to a larger structure? And that really started becoming more present, I would say, only in the past couple of years. That kind of concept of it being all of those three things.
And I mean,
it's also really clunky, and I think that's one of the reasons that. Go ahead.
Okay, sorry. The order of things gets a little odd in the Zoom. I'm sorry, I've kind of lost my train of thought for a second there. Well, I was thinking of what you were saying about like scale, and then like that particular piece you were showing, because like you could kind of see that as like this additive process, but then in a way, like if it goes way back, how that also becomes sort of like is, you know, the macro micro kind of feeling within any of the pieces of your work, like how we could just kind of hone into that tiny little area and how it alters our perception of it, but also that you can have not like a preciousness, but like you know, you're making like these very detailed little marks in so many of your pieces, and it's very like precise, but it doesn't feel sort of tight or fiddly in like the overall sense. And how you balance that, like.
Good, thank you. It's a balance. I really struggle to make sure that it doesn't feel overly fidgeted with, or you know, I think about these things as details almost. You know, they're kind of like blown up details, I guess. And yet I feel like they're exactly the scale that they're supposed to be. Like they are their own scale in a way. So even in my head, I have so many contradictions in the way that I think about my own work. It really vacillates back and forth for me a lot, from being, you know, something that is a detail, and then something that is its own thing. You know, and then I think about the vastness that I'm trying to capture in the installation. Like I think a lot about domestic spaces too, to be honest with you. And you know, what Ruby was saying about how, you know, what if I was looking at a window and there was something up there? I mean, that's literally kind of how I think about the installations, you know, referring to the fact that when we're in the world, when we're in a space, there are things all over. You know, there isn't a way that things are lined up. We are experiencing things in relation to ourselves kind of all over the place. So that's why I can't seem to ever put things in a particular order or anything like that.
It's interesting too, because I think of, you know, in a sense, you're making sculpture, and I mean, because just this like object that we're looking at here alone is like a really moving sculpture on its own, but that your work can uniquely fit into the domestic space, which is not always the case with sculpture. And I always found this kind of interesting, right? Because it's like, you know, it's like you kind of take like your average American family, and some people have, you know, some prints or something, or like a watercolor on the wall, but fewer people have sculpture, you know, in their home, and like what that kind of means to make sculpture that fits into like a home setting. And
it totally fits into a home setting. Yeah. And I mean, I think about that, honestly. Like, I think about these objects as they could literally fit right in.
Yeah.
You know, and they do seem so familiar. And I am extremely interested in the anti-epic. You know, I don't want to make things that are epic. I can respond to other people's things that are epic, but it doesn't seem to be in my ability to even consider. I'm so drawn to really just very everyday.
Sure. I mean, but one thing I think that in a way, like because I think everybody could say maybe what Christina did at Opalka is pretty epic. It's like, it's big, you know? I mean, overall, if we take that in as a whole work, that's a really large piece, and it has like multiple dimensions. But I was thinking about it today, like, and how you really let things breathe, and you gave like space and time, which, you know, kind of created relationships and conversations and stories like within those spaces.
Yeah.
And, you know, like, I guess, you know, even part of my original question was almost wondering like if these things kind of become like characters and friends to you, you know,
I mean, they do. I do. They're all untitled. I don't title anything, so I refer to them by their characteristics.
Yeah.
And so that definitely characterizes them. You know, in a lot of ways. And I, for years, I insisted that my work was not narrative. And that's clearly not the case.
Yeah.
You know, there are absolutely narratives that develop. And it's another one of those situations where, you know, I contradict myself constantly. You know, I insist that there are these, you know, kind of abstractions, but as they play out in space and in time, and in relation to each other, they become narrative.
Yeah.
And one of the things that I'm very interested in is how something can be both a part of something and a whole at the same time. And for a long time, I played with cropping in that sense in works, but I don't really crop anymore. These works are individual pieces that stand alone, and yet through the process of displaying them, they become only one part of a whole. And I think that could happen even in a domestic space, you know, where they would kind of on a wall become part of the room in a way, that, you know, a painting of something might not absorb itself into the scene in the same way.
Yeah.
these
Well, I
days.
mean, I think you really like, that's one of the really successful things about your piece, like looking at some of the floor elements, especially like that little sort of cutout that rests on the wall. And it's harder to see, but I did love this video pan thing you guys did earlier, but there's like these little sort of fragments of metal, like a little sort of cut off area that you actually are looking at, and how, you know, you really just kind of directly married into the architecture. And I also think of, you know, this kind of like these sort of subtle acts of bravery in your work, and like specifically that ring that is lying there on the floor, which is, you know, putting this like ceramic object like precariously in a corner, kind of hanging out on the floor, which is, you know, takes like some guts really to do
I'm
that.
kind of a disaster with my ceramics. I am so unprecious with them. I toss them around, I pile them, I make people very nervous. And I'm like that with most of the work, to be honest with you. They really get treated like objects in my hands when I'm working with them.
Yeah. I love that feeling that you get. You know, just because I shouldn't let anybody get off the hook about answering what, you know, being a woman and an artist means for you. But one thing you mentioned earlier was that you teach at Vassar, which is of course historically a women's school, but hasn't been for quite some time, and that you also were a student there. So I would presume it was co-ed when you were at Vassar, not to try to age you, but
It was.
yes. And so, I mean, all my friends went to Vassar, were also there when it was co-ed. So, you know, was that something like you thought about, and, you know, how does that relate? Like thinking of Russell Sage, and they're trying to like honor the history of a women's institution, and, you know, even your thoughts on it from that perspective, being that that's a place you existed.
Yeah, I mean, I feel the history and the importance of these places deeply. You know, it's you know, especially as having gone to school there, of course, I feel the history in me
Yeah.
in a way. But you know, I agree with a lot of what was said earlier. Obviously, you know, it is absolutely who I am. So it's absolutely how I see the world. Everything that I see that, you know, then gets put back out comes from that place.
I also just, I mean, a bunch of us, Yura mentioned, and I mentioned sort of this idea of like who you're in this unique, you're teaching, like, you know, probably today. So,
Yes.
So you're, you know, you're in this unique situation where like you kind of get to decide who's in the book because of who you, artists that you might teach in your class.
It's true. It's true. It has changed drastically. I will say that. I make decisions now specifically about who not to show as well as who to show. I also give students assignments to curate their work into shows. And I've had students ask me if it's okay to do a show of all women.
Huh.
At Vassar, which is shocking, right? And I say to them, would you ask me if you were doing a show of all men? And
yeah.
you know, it's like it hits them in the face, you know.
Yeah, I feel like we have this conversation, like, is it okay to do a show of just anybody? If you're going to do that, how are you going to talk about it? You know, it's like, it's almost like anything that becomes so specific, how much are you going to sort of put anybody into a sort of a corner? But that's really interesting that they wonder that.
They still wonder if that's okay. You know, because then it becomes something else. It becomes a women's show, you know. So,
or does it? Like what? Because I mean, you know, I mean, I feel like that was the primary questions that we were asking, like, is saying like, okay, there's 4 women having a show together. Is this a women's show, or is this just like 4 artists in the room and you know, what is there to be discussed in that? You know, I think it's that is the question, right?
We have to reframe it so that it isn't that.
Yeah.
So that it's just a show.
Yes, right. Well, and it's like the RGB quote, like RBG, sorry, like of saying like how many women will be enough to have on the Supreme Court, and she says like 9, right? So
that's exactly right.
Or maybe today we feel differently about that, if we would say like 1 less, but also be okay. But that could be my opinion.
Well, now we need 11.
Yes. It's like any conversation that we have is just, nothing is just an art show today in this particular moment in our world. So Joan, I was hoping that we could get back to some of your piece a little bit too, while I think we have like about a little bit more time in Yura. I want to talk about your installation a little bit more too. One thing, Joan, that I loved was that there were these very topical moments in your piece. And one of the woven elements is, and I don't know if we can get a picture of it, but there's a few fly swatters in your piece. And then you also actually have a few portraits of political figures. I think Barack Obama and Nelson Mandela. Am I right about that?
That is correct.
Okay.
Yeah.
And you know, and how you felt like installing, you know, the way that the context of your piece could have changed from just the beginning of when you made it with something like the fly swatter, or how we can perceive any political figure from day to day, week to week.
Yeah, well, the inclusion of those 2 photographs really, I was really on the fence about whether that was okay, because that was a move that is so unusual for me to have such kind of specific content. And that's, I think, where the context of making this piece comes in, that it was during this really, you know, totally uncertain, crazy time that we're in. And it just, you know, for me, I think they work because, or I almost want to say I get away with it because I'm not such a content person. I think they work formally, and they're very small and very subtle, so you don't, I think a lot of people have not noticed them even, and have not commented on it. They don't even see that they're there. I kind of like that, you know, if you look really closely, you'll find them, but they're very small, and so they work as a kind of formal accent. But and then if you look close, you see, you know, they're these very, you know, well, I think of them as weavers. So that's how I kind of also, you know, of really weaving people together and wanting to bridge differences. And so to me, they became like these little, just these kind of inspirational, tiny little guardian figures that hovered over the work in a way.
And so to see the piece in your studio there too, and like how that changes it a little bit. I mean, even the choice at Opalka to put the objects not on the floor, but on that little pedestal, you know, which sort of elevates them a little bit.
Right.
When changes the context for me a little bit.
Yeah, that sort of goes back to, you know, and Christina bringing out the point of humor, which I love that you did that, because I actually did mean to mention that, and I forgot, because I really embrace, you know, I almost wouldn't call it humor so much as a wit, maybe, just because it's quiet, you know, it's not a big laugh. It's just something that tickles you in some way. And I loved that pedestal, because even though it was serving the function of concealing this gap at the base of the wall in Opalka,
right.
And so any work that is on the wall but also goes down to the floor, you know, you don't really want it to have to jump over a dark gap.
Yeah.
So the platform could close that gap, but also, to me, it's almost humorous, because it sort of elevates the piece to this kind of, I don't know, a kind of gravitas and dignity, but it's made of all this junk, you know. It's just, it's made of a lot of cast off stuff. So that did tickle me. I was very excited about that platform.
It is very elegant, and I feel like when I see your work, and I saw a piece of yours earlier this year at Art Austerlitz,
Oh yeah.
which I really loved. And it was just like, seeing that piece there, I was like, wow, like I would, become a religious person if, if like this was what I got to sit there and look at. I could just sit there and look at the show. But the thing I loved about that piece, especially in the context of being within a church setting, and also this piece, is that beautiful like color glow effect that you create on the wall. And and it just made me like, just that kind of like, it's a very playful way of using color, but it's also just very like elevated and elegant and quiet. And I made me think a lot about, that as a way to use color as almost like a sound vibration. More than just color, and also just this sort of playfulness that you're, the many ways that you attach things in this piece. Like there's also this sort of shadowy nail and string area. Where is that? Like I guess it's sort of this kind of green chartreusey next to the glowing gray piece in the middle, and just that sort of sense of play of how you really kind of went through and like, how many ways can I weave? It feels like it's just.
Yeah, I didn't want anything to repeat anything else. But I loved, I can't remember who was talking about narrative before, because was it you, Christina? I don't know, that really interests me about how I think of the work that I do is very abstract, but I think you cannot help but when you're living with it over time, as you're making it, you develop a story about it. Like this is so filled with stories to me, but, and I don't want to or need to say what they are, because I think, someone else looking at it can make up their own story. But I just feel we're wired to kind of bring it into, our own way of our experience or whatever. So, this had a whole narrative story to me, but I didn't go into it with that. It's not imposed on it. It just develops out of the work. And I think it's the way we humans see things.
And the narrative it's another way of weaving, really.
And connecting the parts to each other. Finding sort of meaning connections.
Right. No, I see that. And I mean, also with the weaving and just sort of also that like history of repair, I mean, it just goes into all the elements. Like there's also, you kind of almost have this like spider web at the center. So we kind of go back to like the most ancient weaver among them, and that sort of Lee Bonteque spider kind of form that's at the center of the piece that then just ties right into the old chair. I mean, I really love those levels, which are really a story onto themselves.
Oh, well, thank you. I mean, I do, borrow and steal ideas from people all the time. So that woven thing, I'm going to give a nod to Michelle Segre, whose work I really love. And she weaves, and, this is a little bit different, but basically look at her work and think, how the hell did she do that? And, get that opening in the middle. And I just figured it out in my own way. And then Nancy Shaver is another one whose work I follow and like so much. And there's a few objects from her store, Henry in Hudson, that are in this piece, including that rug there, the big sort of beige and black and I guess pink rug, which is actually made out of hose, stockings, women's stockings. So yeah, that's
how much time, like, are most of these objects from within the last year, or are there some pieces that are older, like little smaller weavings that you brought into this piece, or is this one work really made within the last year?
Pretty much everything is new, but all the found objects and I also relate to what you said, Christina, because I wanted found objects. I wanted them so badly to be able to include them, and I could not figure out how to do it, because you can't just stick something in. It has to feel right to be there, and I feel it works here because there's everything in there has some woven quality. So there are objects that are very old that like there's a placemat that was falling apart. That's the tan rush thing at the right under the spider webby thing. And there's a little pot holder that was made by my daughter, you know, like 25 years ago, and just things that have some sentimental value and kind of domestic meaning. The chair was the last thing that went in, and that was just an idea. I thought, oh, I remember those chairs, and went on Amazon, and sure enough, you can find those vintage, whatever they are, 40s, 50s chair in all kinds of colors. And I thought, God, I wonder if I could get away with that, and just set it up there, and it felt like it just leapt into the work. But I think it's because of it just marries formally in with the weaving theme, and works. And same with the fly swatter. So that's really just a formal element, because it has a kind of crisscross woven plastic element to it.
Yeah. And I especially like the metal fly swatter on sort of the left-hand side, how you kind of married that into the architecture of the space, because it has that sort of openness in the middle, and you just like lined that up on the wall there. But even, you know, what you were talking about in the beginning of really your process kind of starting with this like domestic act of cleaning your space.
Oh, right.
And how the balls are, you know, kind of through that just kind of cluster and sort of that busy work, right? Like we always sort of think of like, you know, these things that are in between, like cleaning up, but that everything is everything, right? That we've like, you know, that act is as important as the act of, you know, sitting in a chair, actively weaving. These are all part of your work.
Right. And that act of just bunching stuff together was something we do all the time. So it's, it's a product of just bunching a bunch of trash together.
Right. It's interesting too, like how you start discussing the layers with this and how that relates to geology. And I kind of wanted to relate that back to what Yura's doing. And that's really the magic in this show, which is, you know, why though, like this video interface has been amazing. I've been really impressed, Opalka Gallery, but like you have to go see it, because there's so many magic moments where what the story of your work, you know, really starts talking about Yura's work right across the way in these unexpected ways. And I think of that sculptural piece, that 8-foot sculpture that kind of becomes like a stack, and like I saw it as like a core sample when we talked about this yesterday, Yura. And
Great
how,
word. I love that you use that word.
You know, but I mean, even in the same sense that that Joan's, you know, piece is like that too, because maybe if we like just were able to sort of take that same kind of like core sample through time of her studio, and we get to the pot holder her daughter made at the bottom and the chair she bought at Amazon, and it just kind of becomes this stack. But, you know, this piece felt like this kind of Arctic sample of like the different layers that we would find in both ancient to new history.
I'm so glad you saw it that way, because that was my intention. Because I had made a painting where there was a big open circle in the middle of a wide piece of canvas, and I started thinking as though we were all standing around the edge of that circle looking down into a core of space. And then I started thinking about what it would be like to take an earth core. And then my partner, Dale, was over working on a big cement wall, and they had to take a core out of the cement. And I got so excited when I saw that form, because it was all these different layers. And that's when I went back and painted the edges. We can't see it in this photograph. This is a shot done in my studio, but of the front of tower.
Yeah. But I mean, your work even too, like the way you sort of just layer surface even has that sense of like that sort of geology of painting, of sort of feeling like you're adding layers and taking away, and the layers that sort of stick and the layers that resist within the surfaces of your pieces, even the wall in the back, right?
Yeah. I so related to a bunch of stuff that was said by the other artists throughout this discussion. You know, the thing about found elements, And in my work, the way that I find elements and collage them in, again, is through photography. As Christina said, she said this beautiful thing tonight. It was like there's things all around us if you look. And I feel that way too. I feel bombarded by the visuals sometimes that I encounter. A lot of times I'll just walking down the studio or down the farm road down to my studio. My studio's in a field in the back of where we live. And the act of walking that same road day after day, you really notice things as they change in a different way than if you walk a new walk every day. So when I moved into the studio, I got really fascinated by the varieties of patterning in nature, as well as the repetition. Nicole, you and I were talking about that in the studio when you were asking me about some of this wood grain that shows up in geologic time.
Yeah, yeah, right. Like these sort of fossilized ideas, right? That like these things are both have, I mean, even looking at this piece in particular, I kind of start thinking of how, you know, these objects also have like a memory and an archaeology to them, and, you know, where you layer marks, even though you cover that up, like it's still the reference remains. And with these, I also just, you know, you were discussing like language a lot and how this sort of relates back to like a different civilization, and how you sort of are almost making these sort of time capsules in a sense with these pieces.
They are, but they're not that specific. It's more like an expression of my hand and some kind of desire to communicate. It's just always there. And using language, I've been doing it for a while in my work, where I will use drawing as writing, and the words aren't clear, you can't read them, but they are a form of drawing. And really, making art is a form of communication anyway. We are always communicating when we're making art. It's just my specifics are not so much about trying to give you a specific moment in time, but there is a narrative there. And that's another thing that was brought up in all of our work. Ruby was talking about the narrative of her imaginative space, and the characters in Christina's work, and the weaving in Joan's work. And in the case of mine, I think that overall the narrative of these 6 paintings is more like reading a poem than it is about describing something. And for that reason, poetry expresses what we can't say in everyday language. You know, it's about human intuition too. I've gotten really interested in that topic recently, thinking about how artists and myself use that in my painting process. So much of what we do as artists really comes from the bottom of our feet. You know, we're just there and it's kind of flowing through us. I don't know what that is. Maybe science will explain it someday. I find it endlessly fascinating.
It is, and also just that sort of flow that you almost, you know, kind of don't see, like that sort of the way the rocks are kind of moving under our feet, but we perceive them to be solid, right? But like that there's still all of this movement in the world, you know.
I know, isn't that fascinating? If you think about it right now, everything is going on underneath our feet. It's mind-boggling. I love thinking about that stuff.
Yeah, I do too. I know, just this, and yeah, this idea of, you know, no matter how much we sort of want to, you know, insert ourselves and make changes in the world, like the world is just doing its own thing.
It is.
From a geological standpoint, especially, but and you know, also that you created the title for the exhibition, and of Unravel. Is that, am I right there, or was that something that came to as a group? Or
no, that kind of came to me in the same way that when I'm painting, titles come to me. It's that same from the bottom of your feet thing. You know, it just came up and it seemed, oh my God, that is really appropriate to our time. Little did I know it was going to happen in a year, you know, with everybody, everything all over the world. So, yeah.
it's so rich, and I felt like so many so many of the artists had something to add to that, of the way of just this unraveling of our country. There's just like the physical unraveling, our like that mental unraveling that many people have experienced. And in a sense, it's interesting because it's like, it's sort of the opposite of like weaving, or these like female practices of kind of spinning and sort of raveling, and then what it means to go back and forth through that space, and to ravel and unravel.
Right, but there's many threads in both meanings.
Sure.
And certainly all the artists in this exhibition have picked up their own thread and followed it and woven something. And in this discussion, it's kind of as though we unraveled what they wove. So we could look at it that way too.
Yeah. And I just wanted, if anyone else in the group wanted to talk about unraveling and raveling at all. And if not, we can open up to some questions.
It just
I
seemed
just
like
wanted to say, I mean, I can't believe I'm bringing it back to this, because I was kind of like, I don't want to talk about being a woman artist, but I thought of something I wanted to say. Which is that so I'm 50, so I was in school, whatever, like that ages me. So, but I always had my absolute heroes in art school. It was Agnes Martin, Lee Krasner, Joan Mitchell. I mean, I could go on and on. Louise Nevelson, Louise Bourgeois. There was this gigantic family of women artists that I still look at all the time. And so I think it's always like, it's very comforting, is my ultimate thing to say. And just that I'm in a, that we're all sort of on this trajectory that's very personal and our own, but that there's this sort of umbrella of this reference, a lot of reference to these other women artists.
When I saw your question about maybe mentioning a particular women artist that we looked at, all I kept saying in my head was all of them.
It's true. Right.
Boris.
Yeah, no, I agree. And I was actually, somebody talked about like women's shows. I think Christina, you did. But I always actually think of this show that I guess was in like the early 90s at MoMA, when they used to do the Artist Choice shows. Mm-hmm. And Elizabeth Murray did this Artist Choice show where she kind of took out like all the women's art out of the basement and put it up. And there, there's people in that show that we consider like, super like heavy hitters, like people that like Yayoi Kusama is like very recognized, right? Everybody knows she's like a pop star, but nobody was really talking about her work at that time. And it was just sitting there in the basement, until Elizabeth brought it out. And I always remember hearing Elizabeth talk about that show a little bit. And, she was sort of suggesting other offshoots for that show. And she suggested like that her next show would be like, paintings of mice or something like that, because it just sort of is like, if you have to have like this as a category, like is just like so as relevant as paintings of mice perhaps, but it was a really, I think, extremely important show, at least for me anyhow, but I'm sure other people. We have a nice question from wonderful Linda Stillman. Hi, Linda. And asking how this being in this exhibition might change your studio practice going forward. If anybody want to take that one on.
Well, I think that anytime you're in an intense experience, it changes your work. And certainly the installation last week was incredibly intense. And you could just feel the electricity in the room with the interchange between everybody. And I think, speaking for myself, making work for this show has launched my work in a different direction. And I know I'm going to absorb what went on. How? I don't know. Not sure. Working more on the wall, I think. More in the line of the last piece that I did, Escape from Gravity, or Release of Gravity.
was also, I mean, just even to that fact, I wondered if anybody had installed other shows during the pandemic before, because I think a lot of us, when we get to presume our like normal art activities, find a lot of solace in that of, you know, being around people and talking about art. So maybe a little bit about that experience too, of what it was like to get back into the gallery space.
I mean, I didn't actually do all my work was made in the studio, but I was there several days last week installing, and it was so great to have people to talk to and realize, even though we were all distanced and masked, and but not just anybody, it was like these women that I've really related to over our work. So it was a great experience for me, but I was not making an installation. So I think Joan and Christina and Yura were a little more exhausted than I was.
Yeah, it was a great group. And I mean, also just to be able to see work physically in space, in the flesh, it's just like, oh my God, what a relief to not just be virtual, you know, that it actually, when it's not just two-dimensional pictures, it's actually real work that we can still go see. And that just means so much.
And I really want to thank Amy and Judy and everybody at Opalka, because it really felt safe to be there too. So
Yes.
Ruby and I have been exchanging ideas for huge 80% size sculptures. We're looking for venues if there are any takers.
Well, I think there's actually some people, there's like a miniature gallery in Albany right now. I don't know if anybody has found, it's on Instagram. It's called like the Small Albany Gallery. So Ruby.
I better find that. Yeah. Oh boy.
We're waiting for you, but I would like to find just like that 80% gallery. I think that's interesting. I wrestle with scale constantly at Art Omi, where I'm like, well, that's 20 feet, and that's really not very big. It's the kind of conversation I have a lot. So it's fun to imagine, you know, smaller. So yeah, well, if there are no more questions, I think that we are done. And I also want to thank Judy for really creating this amazing space at Opalka Gallery that I've admired, and really is like just becoming this center of the local art community and beyond, and, you know, making a space where a show like this, whether it be about women or abstraction or weaving, however you want to take it, it has just like the perfect space to bloom, and that's just something really special. Thank you, Judy.
Hear, hear.
Here.
Thank you, Yura.
Yeah, thank you, Nicole. I want to just thank you especially for your close looking and for coming to see the show in person, and for your great discussion tonight. So thank you. And I do encourage everyone to go. Art Omi is a very safe place to visit right now, and they're doing some wonderful programming and have been. So I really encourage you to get out there and see what they're up to. And please come see this work in person. I think we've made a good case for how wonderful it is in person. Please join our mailing list, chat your information if you're not on our email or physical mailing list. We'd love to keep you in the loop of all the wonderful things that we're doing here. And we're so excited to have this work in the gallery through December 19th. And please stay tuned for artist lectures from Christina and Yura, and other opportunities to see other artists that we're featuring through our artist lecture series, including Melinda McDaniel, who's doing a lecture this Thursday, as well as other events. So thank you, everyone. We really appreciate you all being here, and we're very excited to have this work in this show, in the gallery tonight, and to have this show through December 19th. So everyone stay safe and have a wonderful fall, and we really appreciate everything. So have a great night, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you, Judy, so much.
Bye.
Bye, everybody.
Nice seeing everybody. Thanks for joining.
Let's go have a drink.
Yeah. Okay, bye.